Ready and up. All right, game strategy. Yahoo! What does it mean? What does it mean? It's basically how we think about goals and rules of the specific game. You know, it's like it's basically just understand. It's how we perceive and understand the game. And how do we do that? One of the ways we can understand the game better is through value versus cost. Wow. Everything we do regarding the robot, whether that's in-game, during prepping the robot, building the robot, has a cost to it, right? Whether that's basically points, the value can be stuff like points, ranking points. The cost most of the time is going to be time, space, and weight. That's your main things that I've observed, because these three things are just, no matter like whether you're building the robot and you have to, let's say you're working on a subsystem, and this has to, once the subsystem's actually on the robot, it takes up space that no other subsystem can use that space anymore, right? We saw this a lot. This was a big issue during the 2023 season, because once we had all of these parts on, we kind of forgot to CAD for stuff like the battery and the motors and that kind of stuff, and we kind of scrapped those on last minute. One result of this was, if you saw, you know, where the electronics were placed on the side of the robot. Not an amazing idea.
It's okay.
It's okay, but it was like, was that the reason why we ended up losing comms at one point? Probably. I don't know. Anyways, it is what it is.
It also costs money.
Yeah. These are just, whenever you're making a conscious decision of building a subsystem, doing a specific strategy, whether that's in-game, talking with other players, you have to kind of think about this value versus cost, because this kind of dictates, in my opinion, everything that you should put on the robot, right? And kind of what strategies you should aim for, because it's not that having something with a super high cost is necessarily bad, but you have to make sure that you can actually fulfill that cost. That's why simplistic stuff is a lot better, because it takes less time to build. Thus, you have a lot more time for stuff like testing. And if you can test, then you can figure out kind of if it works or not. And if you build a lot of complex things, they might, in theory, work pretty well, but you don't have that excess time to spend on testing, because you already spent all your time building things. That's kind of my little spiel on value versus cost. Teamwork of the on-site variety. This is what a lot of people kind of talk about as like strategy. Hey, we're gonna do strategy with X group that we're teamed up with, right? This is you got your little sheet of paper with like the arena, you know what I'm talking about. And you're like, hey, this is where our robot wants to start. This is where we kind of want to place our, do whatever with the game. This is like the three things that you gotta do. A little bit difficult. I don't really know how to do this, but after like, by the end of the day, it was fine. You know, it's all about just listening to the other teams, seeing what they can put forward, right? You have to understand where they want to place their robot on the field, because almost everything on the field is relative to the field, blah, 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 blah. So everybody's auto needs a specific place to be on the field, unless they're like, I don't even know if it's possible to have something that's like, can work from anywhere on the field. I don't know how that works. But basically, you just have to listen to the other teams. You have to know your robot, not just knowing what it can do, but knowing how it accomplishes those things, to see if that kind of gets in the way of other people's plans, and kind of talking about that. And then you have being informative, right? If you're just like, hey, our robot does a thing, that's not really helpful. It's also, this isn't just being informative in the terms of talking about everything beforehand. This is also on-site stuff. If you're mid-competition and you realize, hey, the swerve drive is broken, and you just keep that to yourself, people aren't going to be able to work around that, right? A lot of on-site strategy and kind of spur-of-the-moment stuff, good can come out of that if you're able to communicate the important information to basically just everyone around you, the other teams, because it doesn't, right? Let's take the 2023 game, for example. There was that one team that their robot, they kind of hit the, I guess that's not really applicable. Matthew, do you remember if they told us that they hit the E-stop, or did they just stopped up there and then when we asked?
No, they just hit the E-stop because
yeah,
no good reason, but that's okay.
Whatever, it's fine. Basically, if you tell people kind of in advance and on when it, like, as it's basically tell people what you're doing and being specific about it, people can, I guess, make plans to help you do that. If you're talking about, hey, my robot likes to do this one cycle, and can you please stay out of my way while I'm doing that cycle? They might, and if they do, your cycle's a lot faster, and you gain more points. Very cool. Being informative is cool.
I think one thing we struggled with a little bit at one point during the competition was that we decided on a plan and then didn't advocate for ourselves to the other guys.
Yeah.
So we just like sort of petered out and got overruled. So that's another important part. Well,
yeah,
the important part of being flexible, but also knowing your game plan and following through on it.
100%. You can't just basically, part of knowing your robot, part of the know your robot thing is all about advertise that really well. You have to be confident in the good things about your robot, and you have to be kind of honest about the bad parts of your robot, because at the end of the day, you win as a team and you lose as a team, right? Yeah, that's basically teamwork strategy. Defense, it's a thing. This is part one. We're gonna look at two different, because defense is a common strategy. It's not, I don't know. Defense is something that, regardless of the game, you're gonna hear be brought up, is my understanding. And basically what defense entails is just stopping or trying to slow down your opponents from getting points at the cost of you not really being able to get points all that much because you're spending all your time defending. We're going to look at two examples of how knowing the game contributes to how valuable defense is, right? So this is part one. Part two is we're going to look at the 2022 game. This is going to be the 2023 game. We're just going to look at kind of the arena and how that contributes to how effective defense is. Understanding this arena a little bit, we have red and blue areas. There is no collision allowed within opponents' areas, right? So let's say we're on blue team here. That means we cannot collide or really do any defense whatsoever inside this whole area and this whole area. Another thing to understand about this game is the cycles that you're most likely going to see throughout this game is going to be people getting objects from here, bringing them there, and then bringing them back. So this is going to be kind of your high traffic area, and a large portion of this is covered by, you know, the opponents. You can't touch that area. Another thing to consider is your own allies' cycles, which are going to be doing the same route, which means this whole area right here is a very bad place to be, because you might be getting in the way of your opponents, you're also getting in the way of your teammates, and they can't really grab their stuff if, you know, there's a robot here and a robot here, and they're kind of, because admittedly you're stopping people from going, but then your allies have to take a detour, or they're in the collisions. Big old mess, right? This is what I would call a not very good game for defense. 2022 game, wow. Prior to this presentation, I kind of looked at 2022 game rules. Main thing, it has obviously the stuff about like no pinning, blah, 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 blah. But for the most part, the only place where you can't do collisions, as to my understanding, is in these places. which are only used at the end of the game, right? This is also a game where precision is highly valued because you're trying to shoot objects into a goal, right? Which means if somebody's aiming and you hit them, you screw up a lot more of their game plan than messing them up during cycle time. Because messing them up during cycle time slows people down. Messing them up while they're actually actively scoring the point and ruining the point for them removes their entire cycle time. So it's a lot more value for a lot less cost in this example. When we're thinking about just the whole value versus cost thing, just kind of like the whole emphasis that I'm trying to say. Basically, defense works for some games, doesn't work for others. You know, it's all about just kind of understanding, with all strategies, kind of the value versus cost aspect of everything you do. Obviously, building the robot is part of that, but also what you do like during the actual game. One thing that, for example, we didn't really do this season until a little bit late is actually analyzing points, right? Seeing how many points we get in total, like for this specific thing, how much we get for this specific thing, how much we get for this specific thing. And where in this 2023 game, it was obviously getting everything on the high row was very important. But if you could, it turns out when you actually compared a lot of the like data and whatnot, getting like just the ranks, the 3 in a row, is very valuable. So if you're only able to do middle row and you can do it faster than other people can do top row and you're able to get more ranks, it's very important. It's a lot, I shouldn't say more important, well, to a degree, because it gets you less points overall, but it gives you more ranking points. So it's kind of also, that's another aspect of kind of understanding the game, is the ranking points versus points and kind of what game you really are playing. Because the game that you're playing during the playoffs, right? I mean, sorry, not playoffs. What's the thing called before the playoffs? Qualifications. Yeah, thank you. Whole thing you're doing during the whole game you're playing during qualifications is how many ranking points can I get? That's it. That's your one goal, right? If you obviously winning gets you ranking points, so that's not a bad strategy, but your main goal is to get as many ranking points as possible. There's a few ways to accomplish this. Obviously, winning is one of them. Solely focusing on ranking points will also do that, although you're not winning as many games, blah, blah, blah. You kind of have to balance the idea of how easy are these ranking points to achieve versus how easy it is to just win the game. This is another part of just on-site strategy of who am I up against? Is it possible to, if I'm up against some pretty bad teams and I'm confident in our team, is it possible to win and get all these ranking points, or should I just focus on ranking points? Or it's kind of this kind of on the fly thinking that you have to do of just like value versus cost. Yahoo! I forgot what else I was gonna say. Sorry.
Just another thing with defense in general is you have to look at points you can possibly score and points you can prevent, which is where scouts sort of come into play.
Absolutely.
So you need scouts to look at average points for like your main defensive target, and like how many points you prevent from them compared to their average. So I get that. That's just like the main thing to look at if it's worth playing defense.
100%. Yeah, that's like my main kind of thesis takeaway for this whole thing is understanding the whole value versus cost goes a long way. Because everything you do on the field, off the field, in terms of like building, it all has a cost. And every subsystem has not just a cost in time, a cost in money, but also a cost in like weight and space on the robot. And this is something that you should kind of think about when making CAD files for all this stuff. Make sure you're including everything in your CAD files, making sure that, let's say, the first subsystem that's done takes up a large area of the robot. It fits on the robot, but also you haven't considered a lot of the additional subsystems that will have to go on along with it, right? Just because you can, I guess, fit something on doesn't mean it's as optimized as it can be. And one, I guess, the reason I'm kind of harping this point is because 2023 season, we did kind of have, from my eyes anyways, a little bit of a problem space. Anyways, yeah, this presentation, a little bit short. It's
You want to talk about cycle time?
Cycle! Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Cycle time is, I've used that word of it, it's basically just how long it takes you to get a game piece and score a point. In the example of this one, in 2023 game, that would be picking up a cone or cube and bringing it back to your location. That's your cycle time, is how fast you can get from start, pick up the piece, which is actually late game going to be over here, and then come back and place a new one, and place it and then repeat. That's your cycle time. It's just how long that takes. Again, with basically value versus cost, the cost is going to be time, value is how much points you can get per cycle, right? So if you're comparing, when you're comparing, I guess, subsystems ideas, you have to think about how many points does this get per cycle, but also how fast does it cycle? Because both of those play a part in what makes a subsystem efficient. 2022 game, it was basically how fast can you grab a ball, aim it, and shoot it, and then get a new one. That's your cycle time. I don't actually remember how new pieces were put onto the field.
They would fall out of the thing, so it
Oh.
was actually fairly variable.
Okay.
But
yeah, so cycle time is a little bit iffy, I guess, on that. But it's basically just gonna be grab, shoot, move to another one that's fallen out, probably like over here. That's your cycle time, right? Yeah. It's just something to consider when actually building your ideas, is thinking about how fast will it be, as well as how fast can we make it, how fast will the final design be, how many points is this design aiming to achieve, and admittedly it's kind of difficult to tell when you're building it, right? How fast will it be, and also how long will it take to make? This is where prototyping comes into play, because a lot of these things, a lot of problems that you see permeate from prototypes. A lot of kind of how well something works, like the pros and cons of it, a lot of it does permeate from the prototypes. Yeah. Any other questions?
That's I'm not sure you have talked about how do you work with another two teams to make that strategy.
I guess I haven't.
You had a slide on it.
I did, but I didn't really go into as much detail as I could have. Basically, that's actually a good point. So, when you're doing strategy with another team, you're kind of basically, I guess it depends on which teams you're doing, how much info they want. Obviously, if it's like your qualifiers team, they're gonna want a lot more info on your game plan than if it's a ranking. Is it ranking? Yeah, ranking team, right? They're gonna, but a lot of the info just comes down to where are you starting, where are you ending up, and how are you doing that, right? So, in the case of the 2023 game, it would be like, let's say team 1 starting there, teams 2 starting there, teams 3 starting there, and team 2 and 3 are going to be on here, Or maybe team 1, 2, and 3 are ending there, right? It's all about just also information about your team's auto is also typically important, right? Because that also correlates to where you're starting, blah, 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 blah. It's basically all the, because if you don't convey this information and you just go out onto the field and you try and just place your robots wherever, you might have conflict. It's better to resolve that conflict before the match starts than while trying to set it up. That's mostly the gist of that, of how that process works. Obviously, teams in the qualifiers are going to want to know a little bit more about like where your cycles are going, right? Let's say, because this game, for instance, there's some stuff that starts out here, but some teams can only like pick up stuff from substations anyway, so their cycles right off the bat are going to be going out there, versus some other teams like to pick up stuff off the floor. So, you know, it's just as kind of what I said earlier with this. It's how informative can you be while still having like a timely fashion, right? You don't want to spend a whole hour discussing the intricacies of your robot, as nice, I guess, as that might be. It's not very helpful, because at the end of the day, you kind of need stuff to be done fairly efficiently and fairly quickly, depending on how like quick you have to be out there on the field, how long you have in the pit. Maybe there's some stuff that needs to be fixed, whatnot. That's anything else?
Anything else?
Important? Yes.
How can we visualize how the game's gonna play out, like while we're in the build season?
So one big part of, I guess one way to do that is by setting up your own kind of field, which we did parts of that. We built a lot of the scoring stuff. We built the balance thing for this game. A lot of it comes down to that. There's going to be some stuff that you can't really account for, like how does your robot interact with other robots maybe playing defense? How does it, because as you can build a whole basically field, and if you're just playing with your own robot in a vacuum, you're only going to get information about your own robot in a vacuum. That's why also I feel like getting at least some early games can, I guess, tell you more about how your robot functions in true competition, because you can only really get information about how your robot truly acts in competition. Because you can do as much planning as you want, and you know it is what it is. Yeah, does that clear it up?
Maybe something we could have done that we didn't really do, or at least I didn't think we did, was we sort of made our game plan up on the fly once we got the competition, and if like we decided on a more concrete sort of vision of what we wanted it to look like beforehand, might have been easier to shift gears once we got there.
Yeah, 100%. I think